Okay, this is Josh Reynolds. This is Human Behavior and Social Environment 2, UH Downtown Summer. And I'll be doing 3 video lectures of the book's 9 chapters. So break it into 3. Chapters 1 through 3 this week, 1 through 3 this week, 4 through 6 next week, and 7 through 9 the week after that. And then the rest of the classes for working on the big projects and that kind of stuff. So we'll get into the grading rubric in the syllabus and also the grading stuff that I put online. But this is the lecture for the first video, which is chapters 1, 2, and 3. So I'm not going to tell you everything that's in the book. In fact, I'm not going to cover almost 95% of what's in the book. We're just going to take one idea from each chapter and then talk about it, what it means in the real world, right? You have this book knowledge, and it kind of makes sense, but why is it so important to actually have community conversations before you start securing the land for the community center that you're going to build in a low-income neighborhood? Right. Well, of course, this makes sense. That's respectful. But what I'll tell you is I've seen that happen when people kind of start providing services without asking the community what they want first, and it goes terribly. And I can tell you about 1 or 2 examples that are probably in the paper or are public anyways. But things that really happen here, or when a team worked really, really well, and we looked at kind of the social ecosystem of a family. Here's a great example of how we can do that work in Houston to help families support each other. Support the mom's goal of getting a job, and maybe the kids' goals of going to college, and you look at how much better families that are successful, or each individual member usually just does better than they would otherwise. So I can give you real examples of programs like KIP and YES, the charter schools, and I can tell you about drug prevention programs and family reunification programs and immigration programs in Houston, right? I can tell you what school districts do to make sure that even like children who are raised by their grandparents, which a lot of us were, what they're doing to make sure that grandparents can have a role and have like a parent-teacher conference and that kind of stuff. And you may be working for the schools, or you may be working with older adults and working in the same family system, or maybe you're not at all. But whatever your area is, these are going to give you some ideas about how to actually do the work. So again, this is the last time I'm going to talk about the intro, but the intro is each one of these is one idea per chapter. And it's going to give you an idea about what this looks like in the real world. And if you're a social work major, then you're going to need to know that. Plus, you're going to really enjoy it. And even if you're not, you got to listen to it, right? Because this is going to be tested. But also, and I'm not going to repeat that again. But also, they're just interesting stories about how to live life and how to communicate empathetically and ask other people for their perspective. And when you do that in your profession, right, in relationships with significant others, right, even with your kids, people will just do so much better just if you consider things from their perspective. But it's actually you that are changing. So the skills that you're going to learn in this class, I don't care if you ever do social work or human services in your life, they're going to help you. So I'll take 1 skill per book or per chapter. Start with chapter 1, but again, last warning, this is going to, this is, if you just watch this, you're not going to pass anything, right? This is just, you got to do this plus the book, plus the other things that I give you to do as well. Everything's going to be tested on because everything matters. If it didn't, I wouldn't waste my time giving it to you, and I wouldn't waste your time doing something that wouldn't matter for you. We're too old for that, right? I've got too much gray. The beard's kind of short, but I got too much gray in my beard. Okay, so chapter 1. Pause. Stay hydrated. Chapter 1's about the theoretical perspective of this work. And what I wanted to say about that was, it's literally in the title of the chapter, but a lot of times we get through life intuitively, and we make decisions about work and that kind of stuff. We're like, there's some professions that have these hard and fast rules, like accounting. You got to do accounting this or this way, or finance, or if you're like an English professor, right? The way it's grade is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rest of life doesn't work like that. So we don't take the time to learn a lot of rules like they do in other cultures. And these rules don't mean that you have to do them. These rules means they're kind of like best practices or standards, right? So here's a rule. When you're doing when you're shopping for holiday presents or Christmas presents for your family and friends, everyone knows that that the Sunday and Monday after Thanksgiving are when they're the best sales online. It's called Cyber. I think it's called like Cyber Sunday and Black Monday on top of all the Thanksgiving stuff, right? Because that's when all the Christmas sales happen. So the rule is the best day of the year is the Monday after Thanksgiving. That's the best day of the year to shop. Now you might follow that or you might not, but at least it could work well if that's what you're trying to do. So just like that, or if it's like July 13th and you haven't thought about Valentine's Day yet, it's not going to go well tomorrow. It's not like a rule you have to, but it doesn't go well in anyone's life, right? I've done that a few times myself, right? A little planning goes a long way. That's a rule. You don't have to follow it. But we can call these schemas. That's the way that I look at them in social work. So one scheme is budget. The budget has to be done a certain way. Program planning and evaluation. When you're doing counseling or case management or anything like that, there's like going to be a script for you. Hey, first we need to get your demographic information, right? Something that like doctors and nurses ask you, or therapists or whatever. Name, contact information, phone number, all that other stuff, demographic stuff. Then they ask you an opening questionnaire, right? What are you here for? Do you have symptoms? If it's like a doctor, do you have symptoms of this or this or this? They go through basically a checklist of things. You'll be doing that as a professional too. So you'll be asking client families on the first session, how much income does your family have? What are your demographics? Where do you live? Kind of what are your basic needs? What's not going? Why are you here? What's your presenting problem? And you kind of are collecting data on the first session. But when you start doing this, you see that a lot of these have the same kind of script in terms of when we ask for information. So, for example, we do pre-test with a lot of clients on the first session. So we get a little questionnaire form to fill out. You've done that too, right? Like what's your weight or body mass index, or what are your stressors or whatever, and then you compare that to when you're done. It's called a pre and post test. That's evaluation, right? And so the reason we do that is because it's like the P90X commercials on TV. So the ones that they have that are on TV with, like the models, they look great after, but they also see that before picture, kind of where they're, maybe like right after a baby, or they've eaten a lot of hamburgers and they're kind of larger. Everyone has that before picture. They go to the gym, work really hard to get that after picture. That's data, right? It's visual data. You can see that, it looks like this person's lost some weight. They've really toned up. And you can imagine their heart rate's probably better, right? If you're into exercise physiology, or you care about somebody's health, maybe their blood pressure is down, they're less stressed out, all that stuff, right? So that's all data, but we do the same kind of thing with our clients in social work. If someone's a clinical client, they come in because they usually have some sort of a mental health crisis with them or with their family, if they're like a parent, right? And so we ask them the standard set of questions because we know that's what works. That's a schema that works. Now, if it's a real crisis and it looks like they're at risk to harm themselves or other, we have to break confidentiality and stop the session and call the authorities. Call 911. We do the same thing, right? We call 911. And so that's the rule. The schema is help someone where they are, but the rule is if they meet this criteria for risk to themselves or others for harm, then we got to get them into a safe place as quickly as possible. That's a legal obligation, right? And so you'll find that these are helpful rules because you'll get into situations that you're not ready for in social work. And so when you think about this, you think about, well, shoot, what are we trying to accomplish with the program? Like, if I'm a case manager, my job is to make sure that someone stays in their house and that the family stays together, right? So I'm going to act towards, if I don't know what to do, I'm going to say, does it help them stabilize their housing situation? Does it help them stabilize their family? If so, that's the next step, or a step soon. And if it doesn't, don't do it, because we don't want to mess with families' lives, right? So schemas and rules, and it's helpful to know the theoretical perspective behind a lot of it. I'll give you one example. We decided for public policy in the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, to basically reform welfare to make sure that people had to kind of like work hours towards finding a job that they loved, and all this other restrictive rule. And they said, the era of welfare is over, which is never going to be true. By the way, I was on welfare too growing up. Like, I was on food stamps. So, sometimes the kids are involved in different ways too, even if you're trying to punish the parents, right? So we made a decision that someone had to be looking for a job, at least it was like 36 to 38 hours a week that was documented, just to get food stamps that would come later, that kind of stuff. And these were policy changes made by the federal government, by like Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, in Washington, basically. And what happened was, it was hard for a lot of people because if you have 3 or 4 kids, if you have a couple of little kids, right? I had a couple of little kids for a while. It's hard work. It's hard to look for a job 20 or 30 hours a week, even if you need one. It's just hard to carve out that time. And also, why should you be penalized and have to prove that, of course, you're looking for a job? Welfare doesn't pay enough for most people, right? So, of course, you're looking for a job. It's just takes some time. And now we started penalizing that because we judged the way that where people were. So the schema that we used in social work was the law is the law, and people have to document those hours. So we need to make sure if they have to spend 38 hours a week looking for a job, and let's say we offer employment services, we help people find jobs and get the skills for them, right? Maybe they want to go into welding or doing medical billing and coding. That was big Houston for a long time, right? Well, we'll make sure they have those skills, but we'll also make sure that like they have to log that they're with us 38 hours a week looking for a job. But we'll make sure that like they get 80 hours of work done within that 38 hours because we're going to show them the tips to do better, right? Search in these job engines. Make sure this is on your resume. Let's mock interview to make sure that you find out the questions that are going to come, which will make you more likely to get the job. And so that's why knowing all these theoretical perspectives, there's a lot of research and there's kind of a name behind all these things. So when you know the names, you can start putting them together. And that's what the best practitioners do. So that's one thing that stood out about chapter 1. So I might break these up, or I might just make one video for like each chapter, for like all 3 chapters for today. I don't know. One. No more theoretical stuff. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, it's on the group psychology of behaviors, of social behaviors. So I think the easiest way to really think about that is, I'm going to ask you to consider this. What's one time that you felt pressured into doing something that you really didn't want to do? What's one time that maybe growing up, peer pressure really got to you and you made a mistake? You know, and who cares what it is, but you made a mistake you know that you shouldn't have. And you're kind of ashamed later and you're like, I can't believe that happened. It happens to everybody. We're all pressured into making bad decisions sometimes, right? So take a second to think about yours. Maybe not like one that was life-altering, but one that was kind of big and it kind of hurt you a little bit that happened. So take a second to think about that. This is weird because it's online and I'm just recording into my, my computer. But we've all had that happen when we were, and I remember some times when I had to drive for a friend in high school and I wasn't expecting to, and I really shouldn't have. And that's as far as I'm gonna go, and that was 20 years ago. But I made a couple dumb choices. I'm not gonna say what they were, but like it wasn't my responsibility to get someone home who was supposed to get themselves home. And I regret that. It's a little shameful, and but it's time to, you gotta put that away and you gotta say, why did I let that happen? Because he pressured me into it, right? It was in high school and your buddies pressure you, or your friends pressure you into stupid stuff. You've got some dumb friends, right? And you probably still do, especially in high school. You had some dumb friends who were trying to get you into some bad things sometimes, and you love them, but like you knew this was not okay. You knew this was wrong. And if you didn't have those friends, guess what? You probably were that friend. We've all grown up now, but we've all done dumb stuff. Our social behaviors are influenced by our environment. Of course they are. I was born in Kentucky, and then I moved to California and Massachusetts, Illinois, Florida, and Texas. And I've been here for a while, but you can tell that I've lived a lot of different places growing up. And you think about what we're like in Texas, we're in Houston, Texas in 2018. And we're pretty multicultural. And most of my classes of social work, they don't look like me. And I'll just say this, obviously I'm a cisgender, heterosexual, white male, right? There aren't many of me in social work. I have a lot of younger students of color, a lot of younger Latina students, and a lot of African American students as well, and some Caucasians here and there demographically. But what I don't have is a lot of guys, right? I've got usually just me in the class or me and a couple other males, and it's a very interesting dynamic, and I like that, right? But that's just also because we're in Houston, and the future looks more like a lot of students that I've taught them, it looks like me. And I think that's really cool, actually. But demographics is destiny. I don't control that stuff. So if we grow up in a culture where, and I lived in Kentucky, things are a lot more racially progressive in Houston than they were in Kentucky. And if that shouldn't surprise you, right? Even growing up in Boston. I lived in Boston or outside of Boston. And just the way that people are. Think about how like New Yorkers and people from Boston, they're always kind of like snapping at you. And they just have this like New England attitude or like New York attitude. And then on the West Coast in California, people are kind of laid back. It's really sunny and they got the beach, so they're pretty happy, right? And then like we got our hardworking Texans and we're really proud of this state. And you got people from like Minnesota. So you think about all these regions across the country, and even for a lot of my students have international families who have families that are in El Salvador, in Mexico, and in Canada, and in Berlin, different places like that, right? So if you've been to different countries, you've seen the differences. People just are and act differently. People in the South are very polite. We pride ourselves on being good neighbors and polite and respectful. But we have traditions that people that aren't from Houston or Texas don't understand at all. Just like when you go to other places, some of the stuff that happens, even like what the food's called, it's all different. It's cultural, and culture actually matters a lot. So if you think about the people that you surround yourself with, a lot of them sometimes had a similar background as you. Maybe you met them as a child, maybe not. But we're attracted to people that kind of like us a lot of the times, and so you'll see. My friends are people from all over the world, but we each have this kind of background. Every single one of us, and I didn't really think about this ahead of time, but like my tribe, so to speak, we all struggled growing up. We had an up and down hill. We're really driven, really successful, but we're also kind of like always crashing and not doing the work-life balance thing well. It's what they call the type A, right? And so I find a lot of my friends are like that, no matter where in the world they're from. And it's so interesting because in certain parts of the country, it still looks like me. And a lot of other parts of the country, it's starting to look more like Houston or, Southern California, different things like that. That's obviously where our country's going, just demographically. But you think about social behaviors, think about what people drink, what they eat, the languages that are spoken. You even think about what's acceptable in terms of education. You think about how women are perceived, right? And what beauty standards are in different places around the world, and what healthy or not healthy is, and what the role of people is who don't usually have a voice to speak up or not. In some cultures, everyone's welcome to speak up. In other cultures, and some of y'all grew up in these cultures, right? Because I hear the stories. In some cultures that some of us grew up in, women weren't really allowed to have a big voice. Or if they did, it was for the family. It wasn't for their business aspirations, or that they wanted to be a professional or be, CEO one day, or have your own business one day, all that kind of stuff. In some cultures, everyone is an entrepreneur. Everyone has like a little side hustle. In other cultures, you just have one job and you work 9 to 5 or 9 to 10, however long you work, and you go home and that's it. Some families live together. Other families, everyone goes in the different directions and starts their own families. Some families are close when you get older. Others aren't. So culture really influences, and if you think about like your story, right? Culture really influences the way that you've grown up too. And so group behaviors, of course, is going to impact your psychology. You might not even know it. So the way that you respond to things, think about like, when did I act inappropriate? It's probably a situation that you weren't like, it wasn't like your natural situation, right? Because you went on the autopilot and you did it, and that would have been fine where you were from, but people didn't understand it. I've seen that a lot, right? Having lived in some different places. Or the language that we use to, how directly we speak to people and how forcefully, or how much we kind of like go around the issues. Are we trying to be inclusive or exclusive? All those things are culture, right? So, do you see us all as one, or do you see like, there's a lot of drama in this world, and so I have to make sure to protect me and mine, and that's okay too. But the way that you see that influences the way that you think and you talk and you make decisions in your life, and so that is the psychology of how the group behavior, the culture has shaped you, and it's the same with so that makes sense, right? I think y'all be nodding your heads if this was a video lecture. I don't know, but everyone, if this was like an in-person class, people would be giving me examples right now of like what it was like in your family and someone else in another part of the world. It's totally different. So of course we're going to think differently, and even if we're trying to wake up and kind of see the bigger world and be respectful and mutual, learn about different cultures and stuff, we still have somewhere that we're from, and that does influence the way that we talk, we think, and that we that we process things, even subconsciously. So this is true for our clients as well. That's why chapter 2, that's why cultural competency is so important, right? Because I have students, a lot of my students from Central and South America, their families of origin, right? A lot. And I have a lot of first generation college students, and I think it's awesome, right? Y'all are great. Everyone's great. But what's the expectation, especially for someone who's I'm not first generation. Like, my parents are pretty well educated, but whether that's good or bad, who knows? But that was true. So I was kind of expected to go to college. But I've talked to some of my students in the past and people I've worked with in social work, and they weren't expected to go to college. They expected to help out and work, and I worked too for a while, but like I had to go follow my dreams. But that was okay culturally. And for some of the people, it's about like your family and not you. And so if you're working with so that may be true for you, right? Especially in this decision to go to college or to grad school. you kind of like, a lot of people have to these days to meet your goals. But in some places that seems like, I don't know about that. In other places, like, yeah, everyone has a master's degree. So that's kind of your culture of origin tugging at you. So that's true with our clients as well. It's their culture of origin tugging at them. So if they take care of relatives financially, and they shouldn't, maybe you think that, well, that's that's bad for the budget, so I have to caution against it. Okay, but if you understood the culture of origin, or maybe you don't, maybe ask them if they're reason to say, yeah, you take care of my family, right? You're not going to convince this person to not take care of their family. It's one of the great things about them. It's not great for them financially, but it's essential to who they are as a person. So you have to respect that someone's decisions that they're going to make, number one, it's their own decisions. And number two, it's not necessarily a bad decision, right? It might not be good financially, but if this person's identity is built around family, that's a positive thing. You try to strip that, you try to tell them to not take care of their family, all of a sudden they lose that role for themselves, and that hurts them, right? And you can't do that. So that's why understanding the social psychology, basically culture, because all group behaviors are basically culture. That's what that is. That's why it's so important. And you're not going to know every culture, every situation, but you ask and you listen more than you talk, which I do if this was a session, but I'm teaching, right? So you listen more than you talk, and you ask questions, and you say, I'm thinking about giving you this advice, but I want to make sure that this is appropriate for you, and I don't know your culture well enough. So tell me if I'm kind of pushing things, because that's not what I'm trying to do. If I'm trying to push it, I'll tell you. That's the goal, right? But I just want to make sure we don't get crosswise just because of, our different backgrounds or heritages. And everyone's going to be cool with that, right? So that's what you say. That's how you do it in clinical practice. That's how you, and there are probably better words for it. But that's the idea, is just kind of ask respectfully, hey, I'm going to tell you this because I need to. It's my professional job, right? It's my recommendation to you as your case manager. But this is your decision. And I want to make sure that that language barriers, which happens with clients sometimes, cultural barriers, family of origin, even age, even gender, I don't want that to be in the way. I just want you to hear me, but know this is your decision, right? Everyone's going to be cool with that. So that's how you really use the idea of social psychology. The book's got a number of great rubrics and really kind of great case study examples too, but that's the bottom line. It's basically like learning how to communicate empathetically with someone by learning about, well, not just how am I, but who are they and how are they hearing it? And so I start there, and what is their culture about? And the more that I understand that, obviously, the better practitioner you are. It just makes sense. This works in relationships too, right? With your family members or with your boo, whoever, right? So you could say, like, I don't know why they're acting that way. Well, maybe you do, right? Maybe they're acting that way because of something you did, which is probably true, let's be honest. Or maybe it's also something that was in their background, their culture of origin. Maybe you knew about it, maybe you didn't. You can't be held responsible for that, but it's still your problem because that's your person, and now they're very mad about something, right? So you go and say, just respectfully, I think I may have stepped on something that I didn't know about, and I'm really sorry about that. Like, why don't you tell me from your perspective what you're thinking? And as they tell you, then you're going to hear their culture of origin. You're going to hear their mom and their dad a little bit talking through them, but there's a lot of them in it as well, right? You're going to hear the traditions. You're going to hear, again, what the role of a woman is, and you can hear what makes a healthy relationship. And you can hear all these things that are based in their culture as well as who they are as an individual, right? It's both. And it's more about individual, but culture matters a lot. You all know that, right? So that's how you use it. You use these schemas to be able to identify it. And you can do this, obviously, you have to do it professionally. That's why you're taking this class. And even at the macro level, when you talk to communities, how well do you understand that community? Not just do you know the demographics, but do you eat there a lot? Do you go and eat at restaurants? Do you talk to people who live there? Do you get your hair cut there? Do you spend your free time there? Or do you go to other places during the week? And when you really know your community, you can serve them better. So it works on a micro level and a macro level, but also on a personal level, on your level too. So think about that with chapter 2. What are some of the, again, so I started by saying, what are some of the dumb things that you've done because of peer pressure? And now how can you use that to understand where someone's coming from to help them basically help themselves? And that's kind of where we went in that chapter. All right, I need to make this last one short. Chapter 3, the small group is a social system. Yeah, actually, I can make this real short. So, hey, well, dogs. My coworkers are not very professional today. Hey, cut it out. All right, so think of your family as a social ecosystem. An ecosystem is like a rainforest. You got people like animals, trees, bees, I don't know, all sorts of stuff coming in and out, right? Hey, stop. Right, you need to clean this up. And so when you think about your family as an ecosystem, a social system, everyone's got their own lives and their own goals, but everything influences everything else. Of course, your relationship with your parents, and if you're a parent, your relationship with your children, and maybe with your siblings, and maybe again, with your spouse and their families, or your partner, or whoever's in your life that matters to you. Your relationships with them impact you as well. So sometimes you're serving the individual, and sometimes you're serving the entire community, like all of Houston, or Northside, where I live. But sometimes you're serving the family, and the family is the system. Because if you serve that family well enough, and I think I said this earlier, maybe in chapter 1, if you're serving your family well enough, then every part of them is going to improve. Like each member is going to improve too. Like when you start like exercising, doing yoga and running and lifting little weights or whatever, kind of your cardio improves. You start to lose a little weight if that's what you're looking to do. If you eat right, your health improves in general. Your attitude, and like you have more energy. So all those different things are like different people. So maybe in the family system, the two kids that are at HDISD schools, maybe their grades go up. Maybe they maybe they get into like a magnet program, or maybe they excel at a sport, or things start to improve for them in school, and you can measure that, right? You can measure the grade difference. Maybe you help someone find a job, so that stabilizes the family income. Maybe you work in budgeting with them. And so that helps them stabilize kind of what you're spending, because you can always, no matter what you're making, you can go broke. Scottie Pippen went broke, and he had like $100 million, and he had an airplane he had to return. Anyone can go broke. But if you budget and you think about what do I really want versus just basic consumerism, old man talk, right? Then you can really stretch your dollars. And especially in the family, you have to budget, right? If you have kids, you have to budget. There's no other way to do it. But if you think about all these different tools, how can I help each member of the family improve? But the family is the system itself. Or the couple. So maybe you're in couples counseling, and people come to you because they're trying to improve them. Their marriage is falling apart. It happens, right? Or like they're just trying to improve communication. Or maybe they're about to get married and they want to make sure that they're kind of have this on lockdown, right? So your client is the couple. It's not either individual. No matter who's paying you, your client's the couple, right? Or your client's a mom and her kid, or a dad and his kid, or a mom and her parents, who's older, whatever the case is. So when you think about this, you think about the social needs of a system are similar to the needs of each individual member, but they're usually a little different. The social system wants to hold together, right? Because a family doesn't want to break up. So there's that regression to where things are. So when someone tries to do something, even if it's kind of good in their life, but it's kind of unexpected by the rest of the group, some people are going to be very happy for that. Someone takes a job, it's away, and no one ever goes away, right? But maybe it's in like Oregon, right, on the West Coast. And but everyone's kind of, even if they go to college, you kind of stayed around and maybe helped with things in the family business. And we've all done that, right? In one way or another. And once you're old enough, then you can decide, do I stay here, do I go out? The first person to go out, even if it's a great job and someone they love and the life they want to live, that family's gonna maybe pull back a little bit on it, right? Or kind of not be so, kind of happy, but like not as supportive as you would hope, right? Or if you marry someone that your family doesn't like, God, you know what that's like. Or some of you know what that's like. And families aren't bad, but like the families like what they like, right? So anytime someone's going too far out, and that's why when you work in the family, maybe the kid doesn't want to go to college. Maybe the kid wants to like get into art or something like that, and the mom's like, that's a total impractical idea. So they're there for you to help you convince the kid to focus on STEM stuff, right? Like science or math or whatever. But you also know, you think about this, you're like, but it's the kid's life and dream, and like if they go after their passion, and even if it doesn't work professionally, they're going to find something they can be passionate about professionally too. But if you kill the dream, if the dream's still alive, there's always a way. But if you kill the dream, that's kind of it. That's kind of the ballgame, right? And so maybe even though the mom might be right technically, because like you can't really make a good living being an artist for most people, right? There's a lot of rappers on Instagram, right? And I love hip hop, but like that's just the way that it goes. Like there are a lot of starving artists out there. Like I've done some art, it's terrible. You don't make a dime off of it, right? So get a real job. Except if this is the kid's passion, then you have to let them express their passion. So you can see how, again, your client is not the mom, and your client is not the kid. Your client is the system. And each part has kind of different needs, but they have whole needs too. So when you start thinking about the small group as my client's the family, not an individual member, I think that's kind of when you start to get it. But from a macro perspective, this works because if you're looking at, like let's say all of Houston and how people in like these 10 zip codes are doing, right? You can't look at individuals. You might be looking at like family income to see how they're doing financially, or you might be looking at like family assets to see maybe do more people like buy houses or whatever, right? Or you might look at like the rate of employment, and if that goes up, that's better for the family, right? So sometimes the dad has a job, sometimes the mom, sometimes it's just one person they have a job too, whatever the situation is. But if someone working in the household, so the household is your unit, or the family is your unit, because you don't want to say, like of the 4 people over the age of 18 or whatever, that's how many have jobs. No, that's too much. You have to keep kind of a higher level. So the small group becomes your unit of measurement. I'm measuring how many families have jobs, right? I'm measuring how many people are still looking for work. I'm measuring what the income is. I'm measuring how the schools are doing. So your school is kind of like a small group. So I'm measuring school performance, right? I'm measuring how many of those kids like pass the STAR test, or how many end up going, high school seniors go to college, or whatever the case may be. So when you say, so the individual community, obviously your unit, you can have like communities or even larger macro, but you can also have that family unit, and that's really helpful to think about the different ways that, and think about in your life too. What are the groups that you're a part of? So we'll end with this question. Whose squad are you on? What groups are you a part of? Maybe for your church, maybe for your family of origin, maybe for a family that you chose, or that a partner, and that's in your kids or whatever, and that's really your family. Maybe you don't feel like you have a family, right? But at some point, like, what are the things that you would like, and what are the things that you're into? The communities that you share. Think about your Facebook groups. And I know this is a dumb example because no one's on Facebook anymore, but like, what Facebook groups were you back on, or what were you? Well, y'all probably are too young for that. So okay, what Facebook groups were you a part of, and that you kind of took some pride in, and like maybe you loved, a movie director, right? And you just really down about movies. Or maybe you like, I love hip hop, right? Maybe you just were always in a lot of hip hop, no matter what. But you're kind of part of that tribe too. If you're military, and a lot of my students in social work, or some of y'all are veterans, and thank you for your service, right? So part of that, military background, or maybe your family of military folks, or married to one, or whatever, a child of one. Everyone brings their own experiences to this, but you're part of that tribe as well. So I was born in Kentucky. I'm part of that tribe. I've been living here for 20 years. I'm kind of a Texan now, right? But I also have that California part too. I'm a social worker. I'm part of the social work tribe, right? I love hip hop. I'm part of that tribe, and so on and so forth. And each of those are kind of families that I have, right, or tribes. So those are small groups. So when you think about how to impact your group, really understand what the group's about. Are they an affinity group? It's people that are tied together by a common bond, like social workers are an affinity group. Or is it like a geographic group? Are they, do they represent their city? Like, do they love their city? Or do they love their neighborhood, or just their family, right? And that family's great, right, if that works for them. But with each one of those, you'll think about, how do I work in a different way, whether I'm providing the direct service or even when I'm managing staff that do that, because that's what's going to come next, right? But how do my staff do that work? And it's understanding, I'm not serving that individual client. I'm serving veterans. I'm serving other social workers. I'm serving kids in HISD. I'm serving kids in the north side. And once you understand that's the groups, then your interventions change too. And you'll be learning about that for the next, 3 or 4 years or 2 years in school. All right, guys. So that's chapters 1, 2, and 3, kind of a supplement, and I'll see you next time. Have a good week.